My sister accidentally sent me a voice memo meant for our mom, and what I heard about me made me leave the next morning with a plan she never saw coming. I never thought my own sister would be the one to destroy me. But here we are. My name is Carrie, and this is the story of how my sister Jessica's mistake became the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge I've ever executed. Jessica and I had always been close, or so I thought. We're only 2 years apart, with me being 30 and her 28. We both live in Denver, Colorado, about 20 minutes from each other. For the past 5 years, I've been running a small but successful graphic design business from my home office, while Jessica works as a marketing coordinator for a tech startup downtown. Our relationship had always seemed solid. We texted daily, grabbed lunch together at least twice a week, and I was even helping her plan her upcoming wedding to her fiancé, Marcus. I thought we were best friends who happened to share DNA. That all changed on a Tuesday morning in March when I woke up to find a voice memo from Jessica on my phone. The timestamp showed she'd sent it at 11:47 p.m. the night before. I was excited to hear from her since we'd had such a great time shopping for bridesmaid dresses the weekend before. I pressed play while making my morning coffee, expecting maybe some late-night wedding planning thoughts or funny story from her evening with Marcus. I should mention that Jessica and I have very similar names in our phones. She has me listed as Carrie Sis, and our mom is Sarah Mom. Mom's middle name is Sarah. In her wine-influenced state, she clearly sent the message to the wrong Sarah. Instead of wedding plans, what I heard made my blood run cold. "Mom, I can't do this anymore." Jessica's voice came through my phone speaker, slightly slurred from what sounded like wine. "I'm so tired of pretending to care about Carrie's little hobby business. Do you know she actually thinks she's some kind of successful entrepreneur? It's pathetic." I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. "She keeps talking about expanding and hiring employees, but Mom, she barely makes enough to cover her rent. I've seen her bank statements when she left them on the counter last month. She's living paycheck to paycheck, but she acts like she's building some empire. It's embarrassing." My hands started shaking. Bank statements. When had she seen my bank statements? And don't even get me started on how she keeps offering to help with the wedding. She designed our save the dates for free, and they look like something a high school student made in computer class. Marcus's mom took one look at them and asked if we were having a backyard barbecue instead of a real wedding. I was mortified. The voice memo continued, each word hitting me like a physical blow. "I only keep her involved because I feel sorry for her. You know, she doesn't have any real friends besides me, and her dating life is a disaster. Remember that guy David she brought to Christmas? Even Dad said he seemed like he was settling for her. She's just so desperate to be included in everything." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I couldn't stop listening. The worst part is how she always tries to give me business advice. "Mom, she charges like $200 for a logo design. I pay more than that for a good haircut, but she acts like she's Steve Jobs or something, always talking about building her brand and client relationships. It's delusional." There was a pause where I could hear Jessica taking a drink of something. I love her, I do. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened to her if she'd actually gone to college like a normal person instead of dropping out to pursue her art. She'd probably have a real job by now, maybe even a boyfriend who isn't a complete loser. Instead, she's almost 30 and still acting like she's going to be the next big thing in graphic design. The memo ended abruptly, and I sat in my kitchen in complete silence, staring at my phone. The woman I considered my best friend, my closest confidant, had just revealed that she saw me as a pathetic charity case. But here's the thing Jessica didn't know. My business wasn't failing. Far from it. I'd been deliberately modest about my success because I knew how competitive she could be, and I didn't want to make her feel bad about her corporate job that she constantly complained about. The truth was, I made $285,000 last year. My little hobby business had landed me contracts with 3 major companies in Denver, including the tech startup where Jessica worked. I've been the one behind their recent rebranding campaign. Though Jessica didn't know that since I'd worked directly with the CEO through a third-party agency, I charged $200 for basic logo work. Sure, but that was just my starting price for small local businesses. My corporate contracts were worth tens of thousands. I had a healthy savings account, a growing investment portfolio, and I'd already put a down payment on a condo in the trendy Reno district that I hadn't told anyone about yet. As for my personal life, David and I had actually broken up mutually because we were both too focused on our careers to give the relationship the attention it deserved. He was a software engineer at Google, hardly a loser, and we'd remained good friends. In fact, I'd been casually dating a few different people, including a lawyer named Michael, who'd been asking me to make things official. But Jessica saw what she wanted to see, her struggling little sister who needed her pity and charity. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. All those times I'd offered to help with wedding designs for free, she'd been laughing about them behind my back. All those lunches where I'd listened to her complain about work while she secretly judged every aspect of my life. All those moments I treasured, as sisterly bonding, had been performances on her part. But the anger wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the memories that were now tainted forever. Like the time 2 months ago, when I'd stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning redesigning her wedding programs, because she casually mentioned that Marcus's mother thought the original layout looked a little amateur. I'd been so concerned about making sure everything was perfect for her special day that I'd canceled a date with Michael to get them finished. Or the time she'd called me crying because she was stressed about wedding costs, and I'd immediately offered to do all the signage and table decorations for free. "You're such a lifesaver," she'd said through fake tears. I don't know what I'd do without my talented little sister. I'd felt so valued, so needed. Now I realized she'd probably hung up and laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me into freed labor. The most painful memory was from just 6 weeks ago. Jessica had taken me out for what I thought was a sister bonding lunch at this expensive bistro downtown. She'd insisted on paying, which was unusual for her, and spent the entire meal asking detailed questions about my business. How many clients did I have? What did I charge? How did I find new customers? What were my biggest challenges? I'd been so touched by her interest that I'd opened up completely, even showing her my business plan for expansion. I told her about the big contract I was negotiating, about my dreams of hiring employees, about wanting to move to a larger office space. She'd seemed so supportive, asking follow-up questions and offering encouragement. Now I realized she hadn't been bonding with me at all. She'd been gathering ammunition. Every vulnerability I'd shared, every hope and dream I'd confessed, had been carefully cataloged for her entertainment. That lunch wasn't sisterly support. It was reconnaissance. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day going through every interaction we'd had over the past year, seeing them all through this new lens of betrayal. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't believe I'd missed it before. There was the time she'd accidentally mentioned to our cousin Rachel that I was struggling to find clients right after I confided in her about losing a potential contract. Rachel had then spent the entire family barbecue treating me like a charity case, offering to help me network through her husband's company. There was her habit of introducing me at social events as my sister Carrie, the freelance designer, always emphasizing the word freelance in a way that made it sound temporary and unstable. Meanwhile, she'd introduce herself as a marketing coordinator, never mentioning that she was basically an assistant who scheduled social media posts. There was the way she'd started every conversation about my business with, "How are things going with your little design thing?" The word little had always stung, but I told myself she didn't mean it condescendingly. Now I knew better. And then there were the more subtle things. How she'd never shared my business posts on social media despite constantly asking friends to promote her company's content. How she'd never referred a single client to me, despite working in marketing and knowing dozens of people who needed design services. How she'd never displayed any of my work in her apartment, not even the custom portrait I'd done of her and Marcus for their anniversary. I'd attributed all of this to Jessica just being private about family business, or maybe not thinking to mix her personal and professional networks. I'd given her every benefit of the doubt because that's what sisters do. Apparently, I was the only one operating under that assumption. The planning process was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about Jessica's feelings or trying to manage her emotions. I wasn't tiptoeing around her ego or minimizing my own successes to make her comfortable. I was finally free to be honest about who I was and what I'd accomplished. I started by making a comprehensive list of every lie she told about me and every truth she twisted. The voice memo had given me a roadmap of her actual opinions, but I suspected there was more. I began paying attention to things I'd previously dismissed as harmless comments or sisterly teasing, like how she told our parents I was still figuring things out when they'd asked about my business at Christmas dinner. or how she described my condo search as Carrie trying to find something she can afford, when I was actually looking at properties in the most expensive neighborhood in the city, or how she'd mentioned to our aunts that she was helping me get back on my feet when I'd never asked for or needed her help with anything. Each revelation made me angrier, but it also made me more determined. Jessica had been playing a long game, carefully constructing a narrative where she was the successful, generous sister, and I was the struggling, grateful recipient of her charity. All those times I'd offered to help with wedding designs for free, she'd been laughing about them behind my back. All those lunches where I'd listened to her complain about work while she secretly judged every aspect of my life. All those moments I treasured as sisterly bonding had been performances on her part, but the anger wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the memories that were now tainted forever. Like the time 2 months ago, when I'd stayed up until 3:00 in the morning redesigning her wedding programs, because she casually mentioned that Marcus's mother thought the original layout looked a little amateur. I'd been so concerned about making sure everything was perfect for her special day that I'd canceled a date with Michael to get them finished. Or the time she'd called me crying because she was stressed about wedding costs, and I'd immediately offered to do all the signage and table decorations for free. "You're such a lifesaver," she'd said through fake tears. "I don't know what I'd do without my talented little sister." I'd felt so valued, so needed. Now I realized she'd probably hung up and laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me into freed labor. The most painful memory was from just 6 weeks ago. Jessica had taken me out for what I thought was a sister bonding lunch at this expensive bistro downtown. She'd insisted on paying, which was unusual for her, and spent the entire meal asking detailed questions about my business. How many clients did I have? What did I charge? How did I find new customers? What were my biggest challenges? I'd been so touched by her interest that I'd opened up completely, even showing her my business plan for expansion. I told her about the big contract I was negotiating, about my dreams of hiring employees, about wanting to move to a larger office space. She'd seemed so supportive, asking follow-up questions and offering encouragement. Now I realized she hadn't been bonding with me at all. She'd been gathering ammunition. Every vulnerability I'd shared, every hope and dream I'd confessed had been carefully cataloged for her entertainment. That lunch wasn't sisterly support, it was reconnaissance. I called in sick to work and spent the entire day going through every interaction we'd had over the past year, seeing them all through this new lens of betrayal. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't believe I'd missed it before. There was the time she'd accidentally mentioned to our cousin Rachel that I was struggling to find clients right after I confided in her about losing a potential contract. Rachel had then spent the entire family barbecue treating me like a charity case, offering to help me network through her husband's company. There was her habit of introducing me at social events as my sister Carrie, the freelance designer, always emphasizing the word freelance in a way that made it sound temporary and unstable. Meanwhile, she'd introduce herself as a marketing coordinator, never mentioning that she was basically an assistant who scheduled social media posts. There was the way she'd started every conversation about my business with, "How are things going with your little design thing?" The word little had always stung, but I told myself she didn't mean it condescendingly. Now I knew better. And then there were the more subtle things. How she'd never shared my business posts on social media despite constantly asking friends to promote her company's content. How she'd never referred a single client to me, despite working in marketing and knowing dozens of people who needed design services. How she'd never displayed any of my work in her apartment, not even the custom portrait I'd done of her and Marcus for their anniversary. I'd attributed all of this to Jessica just being private about family business, or maybe not thinking to mix her personal and professional networks. I'd given her every benefit of the doubt because that's what sisters do. Apparently, I was the only one operating under that assumption. The planning process was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about Jessica's feelings or trying to manage her emotions. I wasn't tiptoeing around her ego or minimizing my own successes to make her comfortable. I was finally free to be honest about who I was and what I'd accomplished. I started by making a comprehensive list of every lie she told about me and every truth she twisted. The voice memo had given me a roadmap of her actual opinions, but I suspected there was more. I began paying attention to things I'd previously dismissed as harmless comments or sisterly teasing, like how she told our parents I was still figuring things out when they'd asked about my business at Christmas dinner, Or how she described my condo search as Carrie trying to find something she can afford, when I was actually looking at properties in the most expensive neighborhood in the city. Or how she'd mentioned to our aunts that she was helping me get back on my feet when I'd never asked for or needed her help with anything. Each revelation made me angrier, but it also made me more determined. Jessica had been playing a long game, carefully constructing a narrative where she was the successful, generous sister, and I was the struggling, grateful recipient of her charity. She'd been so methodical about it that even our own parents had started treating me with a kind of gentle concern that I now realized was based on Jessica's false reports about my life. My plan had 3 phases, and it was going to be absolutely beautiful. Phase 1 was about information gathering and setting the stage. I needed to understand exactly how deep Jessica's deception went and what she told to whom. I also needed to start establishing my real story. Not the fabricated version Jessica had been spreading, but the truth about my success and stability. I started by having careful conversations with family members, asking innocent questions about what they knew about my business and personal life. The results were eye-opening and infuriating. According to Jessica's version of reality, I was barely scraping by, desperately looking for a real job, and grateful for any help she could provide. She painted herself as my financial advisor, career counselor, and emotional support system, all rolled into one. Our mother, clearly uncomfortable, admitted that Jessica had been keeping her updated on my struggles. "She's worried about you, honey," Mom said during a phone call. "She mentioned you've been having trouble paying rent and that you're thinking about moving back home." I had to grip the phone tighter to keep from screaming. "Did she say anything else?" "Well, she mentioned that you've been having a hard time finding good clients and that you're considering going back to school for something more stable. She's such a good sister, Carrie. Not everyone would be so supportive of a sibling who's going through a rough patch." A rough patch? I was having a rough patch that existed only in Jessica's imagination, and my own mother was praising Jessica for being supportive of a situation she'd entirely fabricated. I had similar conversations with our father, our grandparents, and several family friends. The story was consistent across all of them. Jessica was the successful, stable sister who was generously helping her struggling younger sibling through a difficult time. I was the charity case, the family member everyone needed to be gentle with and encouraging toward. The most shocking revelation came from our Aunt Linda, who pulled me aside at a family dinner and quietly slipped me a check for $500. "Jessica mentioned you've been having some financial difficulties," she whispered. "Don't be too proud to accept help, sweetheart. We've all been there." I stared at the check, feeling simultaneously grateful for my aunt's kindness and furious at Jessica's manipulation. How many people had she told about my supposed financial struggles? How many family members were now looking at me with pity and concern because of her lies? I deposited the check and immediately wrote a larger one to my aunt's favorite charity, along with a note explaining that while I appreciated her generosity, I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I could pay it forward to those who truly needed help. I didn't mention Jessica, but I made sure to include details about my recent business successes and my new condo purchase. While I was uncovering the extent of Jessica's deception, I was also starting to build my counter-narrative. I began sharing real details about my business and personal life with family and friends, not in a boastful way, but just as natural conversation. When people asked how I was doing, instead of giving vague, positive responses, I started mentioning specific projects I was working on and excited developments in my career. The contrast with Jessica's version of my life was stark, and I could see people starting to notice. My cousin Rachel, who had treated me like a struggling artist at the barbecue, seemed genuinely surprised when I mentioned landing a major retail client. "Wow, Carrie, that's amazing," she said. "Jessica made it sound like you were still trying to get your business off the ground." I just smiled and said, "Maybe she misunderstood. You know how it is. People hear what they want to hear sometimes." The seed was planted. I wasn't directly contradicting Jessica's version of events, but I was providing enough real information that people would start to question the narrative she'd been feeding them. It was a delicate balance, but I was confident it would pay off when the time came for the full reveal. Phase 2 involved what I called strategic vulnerability. Since Jessica thought I was failing and desperate, I decided to give her exactly what she expected to see. But I wasn't just going to play the struggling sister. I was going to document every moment of condescension and false concern that resulted. I started small, mentioning during our weekly phone calls that I was worried about landing enough clients to cover my expenses. Jessica's response was immediate and predictable. "Oh, honey, I've been thinking about that," she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "You know, there's really no shame in admitting that freelancing isn't sustainable long term. Marcus's company is growing so fast, and I know they'd love to have someone with your creative background. The benefits are great, and you'd have that security of a regular paycheck." I made sure to record this conversation along with several others, where Jessica offered her helpful advice about abandoning my business for traditional employment. Each call revealed more of her true feelings about my life and choices, and I saved every single recording. I also started asking for small favors, things that would make Jessica feel important and generous while revealing her true character. I asked to borrow $50 for groceries, claiming I was waiting for a client payment to come through. Jessica immediately agreed, but not before launching into a lecture about the importance of having an emergency fund and managing cash flow. "This is exactly what I mean about freelancing being unstable," she said as she handed me the cash at our next lunch meeting. "You're constantly at the mercy of other people's payment schedules. In a real job, you know exactly when your paycheck is coming, and you can plan accordingly." I nodded along, playing the grateful little sister while recording every patronizing word. The $50 went straight into my savings account, and I made a note to pay Jessica back with interest as part of the final reveal. During this phase, I also started declining social invitations and canceling plans, claiming I was too stressed about work to enjoy myself. This served two purposes. It reinforced Jessica's narrative about my struggles, and it gave me more time to plan the ultimate confrontation without having to pretend everything was normal between us. "I'm really worried about you," Jessica said during one of our phone calls. "You seem so isolated lately. Maybe you should consider seeing a therapist to help you deal with the stress of your career uncertainty." Career uncertainty. The irony was almost too much to handle. While Jessica was suggesting therapy for my fictional problems, I was closing the biggest deal of my career and being featured in Denver Business Journal as one of the city's rising entrepreneurs under 30. Well, technically, rising entrepreneurs under 35 since I was 30, but the point stood. But Jessica didn't know about the article because I'd made sure it wouldn't run until after the wedding. I'd specifically requested that the publication date be delayed until June, knowing that the timing would be perfect for phase 3 of my plan. The hardest part of this phase was watching Jessica's genuine excitement about my supposed downfall. She started calling more frequently, always with some new piece of advice or another job opportunity she'd happened to hear about. She offered to help me update my resume, to introduce me to people in her network, to teach me about corporate culture since I'd been out of that world for so long. Every offer of help came with an undercurrent of superiority that made my skin crawl. She wasn't offering assistance. She was establishing dominance. Each conversation reinforced her position as the successful sister graciously helping her struggling sibling, and I could tell she was loving every minute of it. The most disgusting moment came during a dinner at her favorite restaurant, where she insisted on paying, since money is tight for you right now. As we were leaving, she stopped to chat with a woman she knew from her gym, and I listened in horror as she introduced me. "This is my sister Carrie," Jessica said, with a tone of voice normally reserved for discussing terminally ill relatives. "She's been going through a really tough time lately, trying to make it as a freelance designer. It's such a hard industry, you know. I keep telling her she should consider something more stable, but artists can be so stubborn about their dreams." The woman looked at me with that particular combination of pity and discomfort that people get when they're not sure how to respond to someone else's tragedy. "Oh, it's great that you're pursuing your passion," she said awkwardly. "Carrie's incredibly talented," Jessica continued, "but talent doesn't always translate to financial success. Unfortunately, I'm just trying to help her see that there are other options out there." I wanted to throw up or scream or both. Instead, I smiled weakly and played along with Jessica's performance, all while mentally adding this interaction to the growing list of humiliations I planned to revisit during the wedding reception. That night, I went home and looked at my bank statements, my investment portfolio, and the contracts for upcoming projects worth more than Jessica would make in the next 4 years combined. Then I looked at the recording device I'd been carrying to document these conversations, and I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. Jessica was building her own trap, brick by brick, lie by lie. Every condescending comment, Every false expression of concern, every moment of manufactured superiority was being carefully preserved for the moment when I would play it all back for an audience of everyone who mattered to her. Phase 3 was still weeks away, but I was already anticipating the look on her face when she realized that the struggling little sister she'd been patronizing and pitying was actually more successful than she'd ever dreamed of being, and that everything she'd said and done in her moments of perceived superiority had been recorded for posterity. The wedding couldn't come fast enough. Phase 1 began immediately. I started responding to Jessica's texts with shorter, less enthusiastic messages. When she called to chat about wedding planning, I begged off, claiming I was swamped with work. I canceled our upcoming lunch dates, saying I needed to focus on getting more clients. "Is everything okay?" she asked during one phone call. "You seem distant lately." "Just stressed about money," I replied, playing into her expectations perfectly, thinking about maybe getting a regular job instead of freelancing. This business thing might not be working out. I could practically hear her satisfaction through the phone. "Oh, honey, that might be for the best. There's no shame in having a steady paycheck. Marcus's company is actually hiring in their marketing department if you're interested." "Thanks, Jess. I'll think about it." Meanwhile, I was putting phase 2 into motion. I reached out to my network of professional contacts, explaining that I was looking to expand my business and needed referrals for high-profile projects. Within a week, I had meetings lined up with 4 major companies, including Jessica's biggest competitor. I also started documenting everything: screenshots of her texts where she made subtle digs at my business, recordings of phone calls where she offered backhanded advice about my career choices. Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording, so this was completely legal. Photos of all the free work I'd done for her wedding that she'd apparently been mocking to our mother. Phase 3 was the most satisfying part of the entire plan. 3 weeks after receiving that voice memo, I landed the biggest contract of my career. A national retail chain wanted me to redesign their entire brand identity across 12 states. The contract was worth $180,000, more than Jessica made in 3 years at her startup, where she earned about $58,000 annually. But instead of celebrating, I kept up my charade of struggling. I told Jessica I was behind on rent and considering moving back in with our parents. I asked if she could lend me money for groceries. I even let her buy dinner when we finally had lunch together, playing the part of the grateful, failing little sister. "I'm really worried about you," she said over salads at her favorite upscale cafe. "Maybe it's time to face reality about the business." "You're probably right," I said, making my voice small and defeated. "I've been thinking about what you said about Marcus's company. Do you think they'd really hire someone like me?" "Of course they would," Jessica said, and I could see the condescension in her smile. "You're smart. You just need direction. A real job with benefits and a steady salary would be perfect for you." I nodded along, internally counting the days until her wedding. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in early June at an expensive venue in the mountains outside Denver. Jessica had spared no expense, and she'd been bragging about having the wedding of the century for months. On the Tuesday before the wedding, I put my plan into its final phase. I sent Jessica a group text that included our parents, our aunts and uncles, both sets of grandparents, Marcus, his parents, and the entire wedding party. The message was simple: I have a special surprise for Jessica at the wedding. Don't let her see this, but I've been working on something amazing to show how much I love and appreciate my sister. Everyone was excited and promised to keep it secret. Jessica texted me privately, curious about the surprise, but I just told her she'd have to wait and see. Saturday arrived, and the wedding was beautiful. Jessica looked stunning in her dress, and I played my role perfectly. I was the supportive little sister, grateful just to be included, still pretending to struggle with my failing business. During the reception, after dinner, but before the dancing began, I asked the DJ for the microphone. Jessica looked surprised but pleased as I stood up in front of all the 150 guests. "Hi, everyone," I began, smiling warmly. "For those who don't know me, I'm Carrie, Jessica's sister and maid of honor. I wanted to take a moment to share something special about my amazing sister." Jessica beamed, expecting some heartfelt tribute to our sisterly bond. "Jessica and I have always been close," I continued, "and she's been such an incredible support system during some challenging times in my life. In fact, she's been so supportive that she regularly talks to our mom about me, always checking in to make sure I'm okay." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. Jessica is always so modest about how much she cares. So I thought you'd all like to hear, in her own words, just how much thought she puts into my well-being. Jessica's face went white as she realized what was about to happen. This is a voice memo Jessica sent our mom just a few months ago, and I think it really shows the depth of her concern for me. I pressed play, and Jessica's voice filled the reception hall through the professional sound system. Mom, I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired of pretending to care about Carrie's little hobby business. The room fell silent except for Jessica's voice detailing every cruel thought she'd had about me, my business, my personal life, and my worth as a person. The save the dates she'd mocked were displayed on every table. The high school quality work she'd ridiculed was literally surrounding her as she sat frozen in horror. When the memo ended, I smiled at the stunned crowd. But here's the thing about my little hobby business that Jessica was so concerned about, I said, pulling up my portfolio on the screen behind me. These are some of my recent projects. Images of major corporate rebranding campaigns filled the screen, including the one I'd done for Jessica's own company. This rebrand at Jessica's startup, unveiled last month? That was mine. The CEO hired me through an agency because he wanted the best graphic designer in Denver. Gasps rippled through the crowd as people recognized the high-profile work. And Jessica was so worried about my financial situation, I continued, but I'm happy to report that my pathetic hobby earned me $285,000 last year. In fact, the condo I just bought in Reno costs more than Jessica makes in 4 years. I turned to face my sister directly. But the most important thing I learned from Jessica's voice memo is how much she truly cares about me. She cares so much that she went through my personal financial documents when I wasn't looking. She cares so much that she's been lying to my face for years, while knocking everything about my life behind my back. She cares so much that she's been accepting thousands of dollars worth of free graphic design work while telling people it looks like amateur garbage. The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica was crying. Marcus looked mortified, and our parents seemed torn between anger and embarrassment. So, Jessica, I said, my voice still warm and sisterly, thank you for caring about me so much. Thank you for the voice memo that showed me exactly what you think of me. And thank you for this beautiful wedding where I could finally share with everyone just how wonderful our relationship really is. I set the microphone down and walked toward the exit. Oh, and everyone should know, I called over my shoulder, Jessica's wedding invitations, programs, menu cards, and table numbers, all designed by me for free. I hope you can look at them now and appreciate the high school computer class quality she was so embarrassed about. I left the reception hall and drove straight home, where I spent the evening fielding phone calls and text messages. Some from family members demanding explanations, others from Jessica's friends who'd witnessed the whole thing, and a few from people asking for my business card after seeing my portfolio presentation. Jessica called me 17 times that night. I didn't answer any of them. Marcus called the next morning. Carrie, what you did was cruel, he said. It's our wedding day, and you ruined it. I played a voice memo. I replied calmly, Jessica's own words. If that ruined her wedding, maybe she should think about why her own opinions about me were so damaging to hear in public. She's your sister, he protested. Yes, she is, and I'm hers. But apparently, she forgot that when she was telling our mother how pathetic and embarrassing I am. My parents called next, and that conversation was more complicated. They were angry about the public humiliation, but they were also furious with Jessica for what she'd said about me. We had no idea she felt that way, my mother said, her voice shaken. Some of the things she said were just cruel. The worst part is that she was wrong about everything, my father added. We're proud of what you've built, Carrie. We always have been. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued. Jessica's wedding became the talk of our social circle, not for its beauty or elegance, but for the spectacular family drama that unfolded during the reception. Several people who'd been at the wedding reached out to hire me for their own projects, having been impressed by the portfolio they'd seen. Jessica finally cornered me at our parents' house 3 weeks later. She looked terrible, like she hadn't been sleeping, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Carrie, please, she said, tears already starting. I'm sorry. I was drunk when I sent that voice memo. I didn't mean any of it. Which part didn't you mean? I asked. The part where you called my business pathetic? The part where you said my work looked amateur? The part where you went through my personal financial documents? Or the part where you said you only keep me around because you feel sorry for me? All of it, she said desperately. I was jealous, okay? I was jealous of how free you are, how you built something from nothing, how you seem so confident and happy all the time. I took that out on you, and it was wrong. I studied her face, looking for sincerity. You were jealous of someone you thought was a pathetic failure living paycheck to paycheck? She flinched. I know how it sounds, but it sounds like you're still lying, I interrupted. You weren't jealous of me, Jessica. You were threatened by me. There's a difference. What can I do to fix this? She asked. How can I make it right? I thought about it for a long moment. You can start by being honest, really honest. Not just sorry you got caught honest. You can acknowledge that you deliberately tried to undermine my confidence and my business for years. You can admit that you enjoyed feeling superior to me, and that's why you never celebrated my successes. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, You're right. I did enjoy feeling like the successful one. It made me feel better about myself to think you needed my help and advice. When I realized how wrong I was about your business, I was embarrassed. And instead of apologizing, I got defensive. It was the first genuinely honest thing she'd said to me in years. I can't forgive you right now, I told her. Maybe someday, but not now. What you did wasn't just mean, it was calculated. You went through my personal documents. You mocked work I did for you as a favor. You lied to my face while talking behind my back for months, maybe years. I understand, she said quietly. I don't think you do, I replied, because if you did, you wouldn't have asked me to get over it in 3 weeks. You would have understood that trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. That conversation was 6 months ago. Jessica and I have had limited contact since then, mostly brief exchanges at family gatherings. Marcus and I have actually developed an unlikely friendship. He was mortified by what happened at their wedding and has gone out of his way to make amends for not standing up for me sooner. My business has flourished beyond anything I imagined. The wedding incident, while painful, actually helped my career in unexpected ways. Word spread about the quality of my work, and I've had to turn down projects because I'm booked solid for the next 8 months. I bought a second property as an investment, started dating Michael exclusively, and I'm genuinely happier than I've been in years. It turns out that cutting toxic people out of your life, even when they're family, can be incredibly liberating. Do I regret what I did at Jessica's wedding? Sometimes. It was harsh, and it was public, and it definitely hurt people beyond just Jessica. But every time I start to feel guilty, I remember that voice memo and how it felt to discover that someone I loved and trusted had been mocking and undermining me for years. Jessica made choices about how to treat me, and I made choices about how to respond. She chose cruelty and deception. I chose truth and consequences. The funny thing is, she was right about one thing in that voice memo. I was building something bigger than she realized. I just wasn't building the business empire she mocked. I was building the strength to walk away from people who didn't value me, even when those people were family. And that turned out to be the most successful project of all. Update. Jessica reached out last month asking if we could grab coffee and talk. I said yes, but only if she was prepared for a real conversation about rebuilding trust from the ground up. We're meeting next week. I don't know if we'll ever be close again, but I'm willing to see if she's learned anything from the consequences of her choices. Either way, I know I'll be fine. I've learned that I don't need anyone's approval or pity to succeed, and I definitely don't need to accept disrespect from anyone, family, or otherwise. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And I'm definitely better.